And welcome to Carving It Up Live right here on Facebook, as well as the Carving It Up YouTube channel and the Grid Network YouTube channel. As always, I'm Bryson Carver, and man, do we have a loaded show on tap for you guys tonight. As always, lots of NFL. We are getting closer and closer and closer to the playoffs. Lots to discuss. NFL playoff weaknesses. We do it every year. This is the fourth year we've done it in a row on this show. There's 14 teams in the playoffs now, which has been the case, ironically, since 2021. But what's the biggest reason that all of them will not win the Super Bowl? Obviously, one of them's going to. Somebody's going to hoist the Lombardi Trophy. But what's the biggest reason that each of these teams won't hoist the Lombardi Trophy? Get to that in about 45 to 50 minutes. It's one of my favorite segments of the year, so I think you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Right before, in about a half hour, Bryson's Best 10, a playoff edition, my top 10 teams in the NFL, with a little bit of a twist in the sense that, yes, what happens in the regular season matters, but now we're in the playoffs, and so you're going to add that component to, okay, what is this team in the playoffs? What's the experience level? If the experience level is high, what do they do in the playoffs? So that's going to factor in to my top 10 teams in the NFL. Stay tuned for that in about 30 minutes. End of the show, do my predictions for the college football playoff semifinals, down to 4, Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas, and Ohio State. Fantastic matchups for big-time programs in college football. Get to that at the end of today's show. And get to Mike McCarthy in about 12 minutes. Play a little bit of devil's advocate as to why it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Matter of fact, it might be somewhat positive if the Dallas Cowboys bring him back for the 2025 season and potentially beyond. So get into that in about 12 minutes. But first, so the Las Vegas Raiders yesterday fired Antonio Pierce. He was the interim head coach at the end of the 2023 season, took over for Josh McDaniels. Team played well, had a winning record, ended up finishing second in the AFC West. And so hey, team played well. They liked Antonio Pierce a lot more than they liked McDaniels, who we know kind of came from that arrogant, I'm better than you just by virtue of being associated with Tom Brady in the New England Patriots. Let's go with Antonio Pierce as our full-time head coach. Well, year one, quarterback plays poor. Okay, you have injuries to a number of your guys. Devontae Adams gets traded, and you go 4-13, which actually was my exact prediction for the Raiders this season. Last of the division, we say, you know what? We've seen enough Antonio Pierce. We're moving on. So for the Raiders piece of it, listen, I was okay. Go back and check the tape. I was okay with them bringing back Antonio Pierce. My thing is, and I'll get to the analogy in just a second I'm going to use, but from a historical perspective, it probably wasn't a very good decision. Getting to that in just about a minute. For the Raiders, though, Tom Brady's part of the ownership group now. Apparently, that Brady has been trying to lure Bill Belichick away from North Carolina. I don't think that's going to happen. I doubt that comes to fruition. Belichick is in his early to mid-70s, right? He's going to want to try and win a championship at this stage. He's never been to college. He maybe is setting that up for his son. We don't know what Belichick's motivations are. So I don't think Bill's coming, but Tom's part of the coaching search. Maybe it makes the job a little more attractive, for potential candidates down the road. We'll see who the Raiders bring in. They're now one of 6 teams looking for a head coach. But why the Raiders made a bad decision in hiring Antonio Pierce in the first place, I'm going to tell a story. It's going to be a part of an analogy, but I'm going to tell a story, a personal one, that I've never told on this show before. So, because I think it illustrates what this situation is. So, senior year of high school, I took an English class. And generally, I tended to do pretty well in English classes. I enjoyed it. I appreciate literature. But I had a teacher, and without going into specific details, she was awful, which in general in our lives, we tend to get fantastic teachers at the elementary school, high school, middle school, heck, college. I've had unbelievable professors. She wasn't, to put it very mildly. And I remember one day, I remember quite well. She was out sick. This was second semester. And a substitute teacher came in. And she was loose. Like, we did the lesson, whatever the prescribed lesson was for the day. She did the lesson, but relaxed. Everybody could take a breather. It wasn't so uptight. It wasn't so, confrontational. Let's put it that way. She even gave us the occasional compliment. It's like, oh, this is kind of nice. Relative to the previous teacher, she was good. I don't know what she would have been if she would have been given a full entire semester. Who knows? I use that to illustrate the situation with the Las Vegas Raiders. Josh McDaniels, arrogant, didn't connect with players at all. We saw his first stop in Denver didn't work so well. I don't know why the Raiders thought that it was going to be better for them in the second tenure of the Josh McDaniels, head coaching era, but didn't connect well with players. They didn't like him. Very similar to what happened with Matt Patricia in Detroit prior to Dan Campbell. And then Antonio Pierce comes in and it's like, hey, former player, we can relate to this guy. He relates to us. We're going to play it hard for him. Yeah, he was better than the predecessor. Does that make him the right job, the right guy for the job long term? So you can be better than than the guy or woman who came before you. That doesn't necessarily mean you're good. You're just better than an awful person before you. I'm going to show a graphic here. Alfred did a great job. Shout out Alfred Parsar Jr. By the way, the new host for the 8 o'clock spot for the next few months. I think he's going to do a fantastic job. He put together this graphic, though, because historically, if you hire the interim head coach to be your full-time head coach, just add Antonio Pierce to the long list of guys. It really doesn't work. Go and put up the graphic, okay? Dick LeBeau, the legendary Dick LeBeau as far as the defensive coordinator, bad head coach, 2 seasons in Cincinnati, 8-24 record. Dave McGinnis became the full-time head coach for the Cardinals in 2001, was there for 3 years, 16 games under 500. Mike Tice, not Mike Tyson, Mike Tice was the head coach of the Vikings for 4 seasons. He had a 500 record. Tom Cable, 2 years in Oakland, under 500. Mike Singletary, 2 full seasons with the San Francisco 49ers, under 500. Jason Garrett is kind of the outlier, but didn't we always feel like Jason Garrett, who spent, by the way, 9 seasons in Dallas, 16 games over 500 with multiple playoffs, didn't we always feel like Jason Garrett underachieved with some of those rosters in Dallas? So Jason Garrett, a little bit of a weird one. Leslie Frazier, 3 seasons in Minnesota, 11 games under 500. Romeo Crennel, 1 season in Kansas City, horrible year. They got the first pick in the draft. That's before Andy Reid came along. Mike Mularkey, 2 seasons in Tennessee, actually 2 winning records, 18-14. They moved on from him. Doug Marrone, 4 seasons, got to an AFC title game his first year, bad the last 3, 20 games under 500, moved on from him. Antonio Pierce, 1 year, 4-13 record. That average comes out to, if you're an interim head coach, get hired for the full-time job, you get about 3 seasons, and you're about 7 games under 500. It usually doesn't work out. And Antonio Pierce is added that list. I've always called interim head coaches. We saw it briefly with the Saints. Remember when they moved on from Dennis Allen and the new guy comes in and they've won 2 games in a row and maybe they have an outside chance to win the NFC South. There's good vibes. There's good energy because the new interim head coach, yes, he's trying out to be the full-time head coach potentially. We'll see if he gets an interview depending on how he does. But by and large, it's the players are kind of just relieved that the old guy's out of the building because if you get fired mid-season and if you don't even finish the season, the players probably didn't like you very much. Okay, there was probably a disconnect in the locker room. It was probably time for you to go. And so interim head coaches becoming full-time head coaches generally doesn't work. I've always called it the substitute teacher theory. Yes, the substitute might be better than if you have a teacher like I had in English class that was awful. That doesn't necessarily mean they're great. They're just, oh, thank God the other one's not there. That's what it was for the Las Vegas Raiders, and I think they came to bear the responsibility for it and kind of come to deal with the consequences of that. Listen, I'm rooting for Antonio Pierce. I think he's a good guy, a hard-nosed, tough guy, football. Like, I think he's going to get another opportunity as a defensive coach elsewhere, maybe potentially get a future job, hopefully at some point, as a head coach with a better situation than Vegas. Because, listen, the whole situation wasn't Antonio Pierce's fault, but a lot of it is how do you handle the situation? And I really got into Antonio Pierce this season when Davante Adams, remember when that was going on when Tay Adams was still with the Vegas Raiders and there was he might went out of Vegas, and then Antonio Pierce liked a photo on Instagram saying that Davante could get traded. It's like, dude, come on. Like Davante, he can be Davante. He's a receiver. That some of them act like that. It is what it is. You cannot be the head coach, the leader of men of this football team, and be out here like an IG post of players who may want out of your team. Even if he does, go about it like a professional, trade and move on. Instead, it got messy. Davante never played another game with the Raiders. It didn't help. And so, and by the way, something else too. Remember before the season, he talked about, the Detroit Pistons in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, had the Jordan rules. We got the Mahomes rules. And they got swept by the Kansas City Chiefs. So I don't like going after the best player in the game when you don't have the requisite players to back that up at all. The Devontae Adams thing, how he handled that, the fact that historically speaking, interim head coaches who eventually become head coaches for that team don't work. I'm completely in favor of the Raiders moving on. And again, the fact that Brady is now in the ownership group, maybe that gives him a better candidate. I'm sure Tom's going to be a part of those conversations. Tom could be a part of those interviews and choosing, which guys he thinks could fit what the Raiders want to do, because they are a rebuilding team. They don't have a quarterback. Offensive line, not great. Defense, obviously, we know how great Max Crosby is, but just about every unit in this team, other than pass rusher, needs an upgrade. So, and tight end, by the way, let's not forget about Brock Bowers. Holy smokes. Every position other than tight end and edge rusher needs an upgrade with the Las Vegas Raiders, and they needed a coaching upgrade as well. So I have no problem with the Raiders moving on from Antonio Pierce. I get it. I really do. And I'll tell you what, there's 6 jobs available in the NFL this year. So let me go and pull it because I wrote them down on my phone. So Jets, Saints, Raiders, Jaguars, Bears, Patriots. The reports coming out of Chicago, first of all, the list of guys they're looking at, like some of these dudes are I think they wanted to interview like the defensive coordinator for the Dolphins. It's like Miami's defense was not good this year. You want to bring in that guy? So I'm nervous as whiz for Caleb Williams. This is a lot of the fears that myself and others had from Caleb. Like, oh my God, generational talent. Man, I hope the Bears don't mess this up. And you had Eberflus, which was a disaster at the end. And then now you're hearing some of the candidates that they want to bring in. I've said, now that we know, back to get into my second topic about Mike McCarthy and how the Cowboys rejected the Bears' ability to interview McCarthy. If it's not Mike Vrabel, which my guess is he's going to be with the Patriots, that's what the reporting indicates. We'll see. If it's not Vrabel, who's a culture guy, and if it's not Ben Johnson, who, while I may have concerns about his locker room presence, is an offensive wizard. If it's not those two guys, I mean, Brian Flores could work, but I don't think that's a good fit for Flores. I don't think it's a good fit for Caleb. The Bears, I think those are the two guys, and if it doesn't work, I don't want to say this, it's starting to feel like Caleb Williams could be this generation's Andrew Luck, and I pray to God that's not the case, because he's so freaking talented. I mean, since week 12, Caleb Williams had more 300-yard passing games than Mahomes, Allen, and Herbert. Not combined, but individually. The kid's got talent. He just needs a head coach to help him put it together. My man John Rivera, Fan Perspective Podcast, is in the comments. He says, tell Minnie Mouse to holler at me. Yeah, I appreciate that. John, shout out Fan Perspective Podcast. Great friend of mine. And yes, I'm going to be going to Disney World to do the college program very shortly, as I announced on my New Year's Eve special last week. So excited about that. Got a show today and tomorrow. Last shows in studio, or this studio, for Carving Up Live until like May or June. So definitely going to kind of take in the last sites, at least for the time being, before we'll continue to do the show, maybe in different locations. We'll give you more information as time goes on, but definitely going to want to enjoy doing as many live shows here as we can tonight and tomorrow night. To the Cowboys. While we're on the head coach train, let's get to Dallas. So the latest on the Mike McCarthy saga, because this isn't like just any other, hey, are they going to bring him back, or are they going to fire him? Is the case with most head coaches. And, like we saw this with Brian Daboll and the Giants. The Giants are going to keep Brian Daboll. The Raiders just fired Antonio Pierce. Are the Cowboys going to keep Mike McCarthy? Well, it could be within Mike McCarthy's decision-making process to say, hey, I can just leave, because guess what Mike McCarthy is? A free agent coach. So the Chicago Bears requested, and McCarthy, by the way, I should note this, is under contract with Dallas until next Tuesday, January 14th, which ironically is the 1-year anniversary of what was just a disastrous playoff exit to Mike's old team, the Packers, last year. Under contract until next Tuesday, Bears said, hey, we want to interview McCarthy. And Jerry Jones said, you can't interview Mike McCarthy because he's under contract with us. We own his rights. You can't interview him. And so that seems to indicate, it appears to, that McCarthy's going to be back in Dallas next season and potentially beyond, that there's going to be an extension agreed to between McCarthy and Jerry, although this is Jerry Jones we're talking about, so who the heck knows how this is going to play out. A logical person could see this and say McCarthy's back, but this is Jerry Jones we're talking about. Who knows? Let me play devil's advocate for a second, because I have been very lukewarm on Mike McCarthy over the years. I've always said he's not as good as his supporters think he is. He's not as bad as his detractors think he is. I've said he's somewhere around like the 13th, 14th, 15th best head coach. But come to think of it, And I'm not going to make a case McCarthy's like no one's in the Andy Reid tier or even the Jim Harbaugh tier. I think the world of Harbaugh or Tomlin or Shanahan or McVay, any of these guys, Dan Campbell, he's not in that tier, no question. But there's a lot of Cowboys fans panicking. Oh my God, we're going to bring back McCarthy and it's going to be a disaster. And the main source that is, of Dallas's problem stems at the very top. It's Jerry, and the fact that Jerry runs personnel, it shows. Have you seen the Cowboys' last few drafts? They haven't been very good. 2023 and 4 were disastrous drafts. 2022, you got Tyler Smith, you got some other guys, like a decent draft. 23 and 4 were not good drafts for Dallas, and it shows that Jerry Jones ran those. But think about Mike McCarthy. Can we show, or let me just ask a question. What if I told you that Mike McCarthy was part of a very, very, very exclusive group, that is, of head coaches in a particular statistical category? Mike McCarthy is one of 5 coaches in NFL history to have led his team to the postseason 8 consecutive years. He's one of 5. Do you want to know who those other 4 are? I'm pretty sure you're going to recognize these names. Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, Andy Reid, Bill Belichick. Someone could say that maybe sub Lombardi in for Chuck Noll. That might be the Mount Rushmore of coaches. Mike McCarthy's in that tier. You could say, well, he had Aaron Rodgers. How many rings Aaron Rodgers got without McCarthy? Mike has been successful in Dallas, honestly, about as successful as Aaron was in Green Bay. Aaron just had post-McCarthy. Aaron just had some NFC Championship losses, but they got rolled by San Francisco, and Aaron was bad at the end against Tampa. And so kind of similar, success rates as it pertains to McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers since they split after the 2018 season. But if we look at McCarthy's resume, this is the first thing I want to get to, okay? Wins 60% of his games. He's 500 in the playoffs, but 11-11 is not horrible. 4 NFC Championship games. He's won a Super Bowl. And again, you see the stat. One of 5 head coaches in history to lead one franchise to 8 straight playoff appearances. The others are Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, Andy Reid, and Bill Belichick. So McCarthy is in that category. You say, well, he had Aaron Rodgers. Well, there was times where Dan Marino missed the playoffs, and John Elway missed the playoffs, and Drew Brees missed the playoffs. It happens. Heck, Joe Burrow just missed the playoffs. Okay, coaching had something to do with the Packers' success. And by the way, for all of the criticism that I and everybody else has had, man, clock management, are you ready to play? All these different things, adjustments. Again, playing devil's advocate here. Have we had the same criticism of guys like Kyle Shanahan? And I love Kyle. He makes any quarterback who is NFL ready, he makes them look, in the case of Jimmy Garoppolo, look like a franchise quarterback. In the case of Brock Purdy, look like an MVP one year. I love Kyle Shanahan, but isn't that kind of the knock on Kyle? Blown leads in the fourth quarter of Super Bowls or NFC Championship games, not adjusting. My big thing is Kyle's a brilliant play caller. The problem is when those plays aren't working, which is rare, but when they're not working, he doesn't adjust. So couldn't I make that case? And for the record, Kyle's been into Super Bowls, albeit with stacked rosters, that John Lynch put together. What's Mike McCarthy had in Dallas? Now, he's had Dak. You guys know I love Dak more than him in just a second. CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons. They've had guys. But as I've said, and I think folks kind of came to my position a little bit over the last, 6 months or so, I've said since 2022, is Dallas's roster actually that good? Mike is a special player. We know this. Micah missed, 4 or 5 games? It was still top 5 in sacks. Micah quietly had an excellent season. For all of the noise he makes and whatnot, Micah's productive. Okay, but defensively, Trayvon Diggs had a down year. The secondary wasn't very good. The interior of the D-line needs some work. The linebacking core had this young phenom Overshown, who, God bless him, knock on wood, sucks for him. Back-to-back injuries to start his career. The defense is kind of thin. Offensively, the offensive line has deteriorated because of the loss of Tyron Smith, the aging of Zach Martin. I've said for years, look at the numbers. CeeDee Lamb, coming into this year, more valuable wide receiver to the Dallas Cowboys than any wide receiver in football, because Dallas has no depth at that position. Ferguson's an okay tight end. He's nothing special. And the run game has that always not been the knock on the Dallas Cowboys. No run game. Well, aren't a lot of those problems Jerry Jones induced? Personnel induced, not making good decisions, not putting together good drafts like the Detroit Lions do or the 49ers do or Kansas City does. not spending money in free agency when Derrick Henry makes it abundantly clear, hey, I'd love to play for the Cowboys. And Stephen Jones like, you're going to penny pinch a little bit. And now Derrick Henry goes for 1,900 yards in Baltimore. It is the biggest reason a lot of folks think the Ravens may win the Super Bowl this year. Saquon Barkley was on the market too. Didn't go after him. 85, I will go this far, 85% of Dallas's problems, 90% even, potentially, of the Dallas Cowboys' problems stems from that guy on top. They've had different quarterbacks. They've had different coaches. They've had different rosters. They've had great rosters. 07, I will go to my grave believing this, or at least in this championship drought that Dallas has had. In the 30-year drought the Cowboys have had of not going to a Super Bowl or winning one anyway, 07 was by far the best team they had. Couldn't get out of round two. First one seed to lose in the new 16 playoff era, in this divisional round that is. So all the problems in Dallas, most of them anyway, stem from Jerry. Can we look at Dak Prescott's numbers? And I love Dak. You know that's my guy. I like Dak more than most. I think he's dealt with utter chaos in Dallas for almost a decade now, which is why I wish he wouldn't have signed the extension. Be that as it may, Mike McCarthy has had Dak Prescott for 5 seasons, but the first and most recent, 2020 and 2024, Dak's gotten hurt and missed a massive chunk of the season. So let's look at the full seasons that Dak Prescott has had as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. And while I love Dak, as we see with Caleb Williams in Chicago, every great player needs a coach. It doesn't hurt Mahomes that he has Andy Reid. Dak Prescott with Mike McCarthy, when Dak's healthy, he's a bona fide top 10 quarterback, no questions asked. 3rd in touchdowns, 23rd in picks. That's not great, but that's going to come when you have 3rd in touchdown passes. 8th in pass yards per game. 3rd in completion percentage. Dak, as I've said, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in football. Passer rating of 101, which is 2nd. 31 wins, which ranks 4th in the National Football League. If you want to bag on Dak in the playoffs, bag on McCarthy in the playoffs, be my guest, but they get you a whole heck of a lot further than most 2-0s do. Would I like if Dak had a better coach than McCarthy? Yes. But are we sure a better coach would go to Dallas? That was always the thing. Oh, Bill Belichick. First of all, I'm not sure how great Belichick is at this point. Been saying that for 5 years. Sean Payton. Okay, Sean Payton has a relationship with the Joneses. That doesn't mean he wants to work with them. You have friends. I have friends that in our lives that, are fun to hang around. You wouldn't necessarily trust them to work with. We all have that one friend who's fun to go have a good time with, but you don't necessarily trust them. That's how Sean Payton probably feels about the Jones family. That's why Sean Payton never went to Dallas, despite the fact that there were opportunities for him to go there. And so, Mike Vrabel. Why did Mike Vrabel go to Dallas? Mike Vrabel's a no BS guy, culture guy, and Dallas is the exact opposite. It's all BS, something every day. And so, for any Cowboys fans oh no, we're bringing McCarthy back. Trust me. A, there are worse options. B, I'm not sure you get a better one with the guy running things the way he is, named Jerry Jones. Botching offseason after offseason, free agency after free agency, draft after draft, waiting too long to pay Dak, waiting too long to pay CeeDee Lamb. My guess is he's probably going to wait too long to pay Micah Parsons. So before you go on criticizing the Cowboys, I would just caution you and say they probably won't get much better than Mike, and Mike's been pretty good. When Dak's healthy, when they have a top 10 quarterback in the NFL healthy, 12 wins, 12 wins, 12 wins. And for the record, Cooper Rush is a fine backup. Mike McCarthy kept the Cowboys competitive this season with Cooper Rush at quarterback. And Cooper's fine, but Cooper can't move at all, has no arm strength, and accuracy's hit and miss. Mike's won games with that guy. He went 4-0 at one stretch in 2022 with a roster that isn't that good, as I've said for a long time. So if you want to stack up the Cowboys' problems, it goes like Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Mike McCarthy, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Jerry Jones, Dak Prescott. You got to go down a long ways before you get to those two in Dallas. I would bring McCarthy back because if I'm the Dallas Cowboys, people it's Dallas. It's Ben Johnson's going to want his first head coach job of his career after coming from Detroit. The ultimate beat you over the head, biting kneecaps. It's all about winning. We're going to win with attitude. Dallas we want to be flashy and exciting and play on Thanksgiving, and there's little substance there. Dallas, in some ways, almost like the cotton candy of the NFL. Tastes good, not much there. So I would bring Mike McCarthy back. Again, playing devil's advocate. I've criticized Mike in the past. I wish he would use analytics a little more. As I always say, don't overuse analytics. Don't make them make every decision. Don't allow them to make every decision for you, but you got to use them because they make you smarter and make your team better. You should use them. You can't reject information. So maybe I'm crazy. I think bringing Mike McCarthy back would be far from the worst thing ever. By the way, Adam Schefter 21 minutes ago, Bears completed an interview with head coach candidate Mike Vrabel. So, and again, Chicago's been interviewing a lot of guys. They've got a massive list of dudes that they want to look at, potentially interview. We'll see what happens. But again, I think if it's not Vrabel and if it's not Ben Johnson, both I think would be a good fit in Chicago for different reasons. I think it is. I think we're talking about Andrew Luck 2.0 with Caleb Williams. And I hope, because I loved Andrew Luck out of Stanford, and I think the Colts wasted him, never gave him a good O-line. God bless Chuck Pagano, seemed like a nice enough guy, but not an elite coach. And he got him to an AFC title game one year. I mean, they wasted him. I hope that's not the case with Caleb Williams with the Chicago Bears, because he's too freaking talented to be wasted like this. So we'll see. I'm curious to see when the Bears decide to make their decision, because I imagine Vrabel, Ben Johnson, going to be getting on a lot of planes to go interview, going to be logging on to Zoom a lot. Let's put it that way. Especially in the case of Ben Johnson, because he won't be able to travel a ton. Lions are in the playoffs. He'll be able to travel this week, that is, because the Lions are on a bye before their first playoff game. But only time will tell. All right. Okay, here's what we'll do. Normally, I would take a break here and say that, gosh darn it, I just realized something. That segment we just did with Mike McCarthy was our Carving Out the Context segment, and I didn't even get the respect it deserved, where I say, as the head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes, primetime Deion Sanders says, give me my theme music. Didn't get to do that. So what we'll do, we'll upload this to YouTube. I'll record the Deion Sanders bit, and then we'll upload on social media. So my bad. So the Mike McCarthy thing was our Carving Up the Context. I apologize for not letting y'all know ahead of time. That is 100% my bad and on me. John Rivera, yeah, no, all gas, no brakes. That's the mindset. That's what we bring to the table here on Carving It Up. All right, so we're not going to go to break. We'll do that after this next segment, because normally Carving Up the Context is 30 minutes in. Bryson's Best 10 is 45 minutes in. But because of today, because we have predictions for the college football playoff at the end, because we have our special that we do every year at this time, NFL playoff weaknesses, the weakness of all of the 14 playoff teams, get to the weaknesses in about 15 minutes. But it is for the football season, in terms of ranking the teams, final edition of Bryson's Best 10. This is the last time we're going to rank 10 teams. We'll do Bryson's Best 8, I guess, next week. But the last Bryson's Best 10 teams of the football season, which is kind of depressing because this season flew by. But let's go and get the background music going. Let's go and get rolling here on Carving Out Bryson's Best 10. Okay, here we go, baby. So I'll say on the front end, before we get to our 10th best team, I'll say on the front end, the regular season obviously matters as it relates to these picks. So there's only 14 teams, the 14 playoff teams, that are eligible to be on Bryson's Best 10 from here on out. With that said, I am factoring in that it is the playoffs, so I'm going to sort of impose that sort of criteria onto this list, onto these rankings, to say, okay, have I seen you before in the playoffs? What have you been in the playoffs? What's your resume look like? What's your recent resume look like? So keep that in mind as I do my rankings. So the 10th best team in the National Football League, staying where they were at last week, it is the Washington Commanders. The Commanders are the 10th best team in the National Football League, and here is why. So who'd have thought? I thought the Commanders would be a respectable team this year. I liked Jaden Daniels out of LSU. I love the new ownership, and getting Dan Snyder out of the building, getting Magic Johnson and Josh Harris, and a good GM, Dan Quinn, the whole thing. Who, God's grant, even Washington fans would have thought this team would have went 12-5 in what was a stacked NFC. Congrats to them. But Jaden Daniels, I think, is the offensive rookie of the year, followed closely by Brock Bowers. What this guy did this year was unbelievable. In the clutch the last 3 weeks, not just Jaden Daniels against the Eagles and then against the Atlanta Falcons, but last week against Dallas, Marcus Mariota doing his thing, throwing a game-winning touchdown, I believe, to Terry McLaurin to beat the Cowboys in the winning moments. This team is not scared to play close games. Matter of fact, they thrive in those spots. I don't love Washington's O-line, but Jaden Daniels makes up for a lot of that. I certainly don't love the Commanders' defense at all. So I think if Washington's going to want to make any sort of deep playoff run, they're going to have to find a way to get not just get stops, but score at least 35 a game, which is going to be tough, especially for a team with a lack of playoff experience. But listen, Washington's going to be tough. I love this matchup between they and Tampa Bay because I feel like they're sort of similar versions of the same team to a certain degree. So Washington is the 10th best team in the National Football League. At number 9, team I just mentioned, who they're going to be playing back in Bryce's best 10, it is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are the 9th best team in the National Football League, and here is why. So again, they're very similar to Washington in the sense that elite offense. By the way, too, with Tampa, so Baker had the best season of his career. Okay, I believe he had 39, 40 touchdowns this year. Baker was excellent. Mike Evans, shout out to my guy Mike Evans. Last catch of the regular season, got over the 1,000-yard threshold. He ties Jerry Rice. 11 straight seasons for Mike Evans of over 1,000 yards receiving. Shout out to him. But Bucky Irving, we talk about Jaden Daniels and Brock Bowers and Bo Nix. Can we give Bucky Irving some love for Offensive Rookie of the Year? The guy's playing out of his mind as of late. So Bucky Irving run the football the way he's been. Again, Mike Evans stepped up defensively. I don't love this Tampa team defensively. They play better as of late. Todd Bowles, again, second playoff appearance for him as the head coach. He was an outstanding defensive coordinator for Tampa under Bruce Arians when they won a Super Bowl in 2020. So again, a lot of these guys have extensive playoff experience. They've won a Super Bowl. A lot of these guys with Tom Brady. Baker's won multiple playoff games. So I think Tampa's a team that could, if they're in the NFC Championship game, I won't be shocked. So Tampa Bay Bucs are the 9th best team in the National Football League. This is not going to be fair. This fan base is going to rip me for it, but it is what it is. I got to factor in it's the playoffs. At number 8, dropping 4 spots from last week, it is the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are the 8th best team in the National Football League, and here is why. Again, it may not sound fair. You're like, Bryce, Vikings went 14-3. They have one of the best defenses in the league. Brian Flores may be a head coach somewhere next year. I think Brian Flores is the second best defensive coordinator in the league to Steve Spagnuolo. I think Flores is an outstanding coach. And Kevin O'Connell, you know what I think of him? I think he's brilliant. Problem is, and he's young. He's 3 years in. He's got plenty of time. Kevin O'Connell's never won a playoff game. Sam Darnold has never played in a playoff game. So you have the inexperience factor in it. Justin Jefferson has only played in one playoff game in his career. So I think just the inexperience, never been to the big stage, or at least never gotten to a bigger stage with this group in Minnesota. With that said, part of the reason I dropped the number 8 as well, and again, their roster I think is really good, is I think losing that game against Detroit was far bigger for Minnesota than had the roles been reversed and the Lions lost, because Detroit's undefeated on the road. It's Dan Campbell. It's like, F all this. We can win on the road. We're not scared of this. Minnesota, you miss out on the home field of US Bank. There's we could have been the 1 seed, gotten a week off, home field advantage. We're the Super Bowl favorites too. We've got to go on the road the entire playoffs. And so I think there's a letdown there, a natural letdown for Minnesota. Sam Darnold's playing the best season of his career, obviously by far. I think he'll play better in the playoff game than he did against Detroit, but there is pressure on him to say, okay, was all of this, were you great when no one really expected something and then collapse? I'm not going to say choke. When people expected stuff of you, Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings, I haven't seen them in the biggest stage yet at all as a squad. They are the 8th best team in the National Football League. And the team they're going to be playing is my number 7 team, up 2 spots from last week. It is the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams are the 7th best team in the National Football League, and here is why. So this is a Rams team that has sputtered offensively in the last 3 games. Hasn't broke 20 prior to that last game with Jimmy Garoppolo starting, with Matthew Stafford and their starters, have not broke 20 points in those last 3 games after scoring 44 against the Buffalo Bills. But just like last season, finished the year hot, and people forget last year. Oh, they went out in round 1, whatever. Had they cashed in on one of their multiple red zone opportunities, they would have beaten Detroit, and maybe they would have been the NFC Championship game, and dare I say the Super Bowl. And again, this is where the playoffs factor in. How the way it hurt Minnesota is the way it helps the Rams. I've seen Cooper Kupp win a Super Bowl MVP. I've seen Matthew Stafford win playoff games and be great in playoff games. I've seen Sean McVay win playoff games prior to Matthew Stafford. This is a young, talented defense. Again, that could get them beat because of the inexperience on that side of the ball. When you have a guy like Puka, when you have playoff Cooper Kupp, when you've got Kyren Williams run the football, Matt Stafford, by the way, a lot of these guys with a week of rest, which for a guy like Stafford getting up there in age, that does mean something to him in year 16. I'm telling you, I believed in the Rams as a very real NFC Championship type of team before the season. I think they are that. They are the 7th best team in the National Football League. And the team they share a stadium with is a spot above them at number 6, up 2 spots from last week. It is the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are the sixth best team in the National Football League, and here is why. Just like their counterpart, in-city counterpart, the Rams, finished the season hot, right? Rams getting on a win streak. Justin Herbert playing his best football this season. Ladd McConkey over 1,000 yards. The Chargers, statistically, the best defense in the National Football League. I think they have a Coach of the Year candidate in Jim Harbaugh, getting them from 5 wins. Are you kidding me? Getting them from 5 wins to 11? Listen, similar to the Rams, I thought the Chargers were an AFC title game potential contender this season. I don't know if their offense has quite the spark, get it, Charger, spark, that you need to go on a deep playoff run in the AFC. We'll see. Justin Herbert never won a playoff game. But Jim Harbaugh, people are like, oh, it was a long time ago. It was the last chance he got in San Francisco. 2011, NFC title game. 2012, Super Bowl. 2013, NFC Championship game. And because Trent Baalke, who somehow maintains his job in Jacksonville, okay, because of the bad relationship there, he kicks Jim Harbaugh to the curb after a rough 2014 season. I've been in the mindset Jim Harbaugh is like the second or third best football coach alive. I believe that. And I think having him, Justin Herbert's going to look to prove some doubters wrong, get his first playoff W in his second playoff appearance. His Chargers defense is awesome. The weapons maybe are stepping up a little bit. We'll see. And by the way, an excellent running game. Having J.K. Dobbins coming back potentially is going to be huge for the Chargers, who are the sixth best team in the National Football League. At number 5, and again, they would be higher if their playoff resume was a bit better. Staying where they're at from last week, at number 5, it is the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are the 5th best team in the National Football League, and here is why. Again, Lamar Jackson, rough playoff statistics, rough playoff record, 2-4, barely with a guy in Lamar. Beats with his arm, beats with his legs. He barely averages 200 yards per game individually in the postseason. Not only that, John Harbaugh struggled to trust the Baltimore Ravens. I've said this for like 2 years on the show in terms of holding double-digit fourth-quarter leads. Statistically, they're the worst team in the NFL at holding such leads since 2020. Derrick Henry's awesome. Like that's the one sort of saving grace that, hey, the last few years, yeah, we haven't been up to snuff in the playoffs. The last few years, we didn't have big number 22 Derrick Henry, King Henry, running the football at a high level. This Baltimore team, though, has stepped up defensively big time since the bye week. Zach Orr's done a really good job with this group. We know how great Roquan Smith is. The pass rush in Baltimore is real. Kyle Van Noy doing his thing. This Ravens defense is playing the best they have all season long. Not quite to the level that they did last year, but they're as dangerous as anybody in the NFC. In the AFC, rather, no question. They very well might be in my top 3 if we had evidence to say you could trust Lamar Jackson. And to a certain degree, John Harbaugh in the postseason. The Ravens are the 5th best team in the National Football League. At number 4, moving up 2 spots from last week, it is the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are the 4th best team in the National Football League, and here is why. It looks like, according to all accounts in Philadelphia, that Jalen Hurts is going to be available for Sunday afternoon in that playoff game against the Green Bay Packers, which is going to be critical for Philadelphia because you need that guy to make Saquon's job easier with his legs. Got to respect Jalen Hurts running the football. But for this Eagles team, listen, this was a team that had arguably the best defense in all of football 2 years ago when they made the Super Bowl and set the all-time single-season record for team sacks. Took a massive step back in 23, but upgraded tremendously. Got Vic Fangio, who fixed their defense. Drafted the 2 young defensive backs in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean to really fix the back end of that defense. On the outsides, interior, they're excellent. Nakobe Dean, has been great this season. One of the best wide receiver duos in football with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Saquon is, I think, the runaway offensive player of the year this year. And by the way, what is a pretty stacked pool in that regard. Philly's offensive line, best or second best. I got them right behind Detroit in terms of productivity. By the way, what I was talking about with the Rams, Eagles, starters, week off. Right? So you got Saquon with fresh legs. You got the Eagles offensive line, particularly Lane Johnson, fresh legs. Offensive starters, offensive receivers, or wide receivers like Brown and Smith, Dallas Goedert. This is a dangerous team. I think they're one of the 3 best rosters of football. They went to a Super Bowl just 2 years ago with a lot of the guys that are on this team. The Philadelphia Eagles are the 4th best team in the National Football League. At number 3, staying where they were at last week, or I apologize, dropping a spot from where they were last week. It is the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are the 3rd best team in the National Football League, and here is why. So again, playoff. Josh Allen in his career has been excellent in the playoffs. The problem is he keeps running into Patrick Mahomes, and it's kind of a situation like, LeBron James running into the Warriors, where Now, the situation is LeBron was better than Steph Curry, and I love Steph Curry. But again, you get the picture. Great player running into a better team and a better quarterback and a dynasty. How many times have we seen that in NBA history, NFL history? Big Ben, Phil Rivers can never get past Brady. That's kind of the situation that we're seeing here. And so, but the guy, what he's done with his legs, with his arm, I think he's shouldered a greater load than Lamar Jackson this season. That's why I would vote him MVP, with Lamar coming in second. But this Bills team, offensively, people talk about, oh, their weapons aren't as good as you know, they have been in previous years. I don't know. I'd swap in Stephon Diggs for Keon Coleman and for guys like Amari Cooper, who was a really good get. James Cook, we'll see what he's able to do in the postseason. He was solid last year in that. Khalil Shakir. Offensive line is the best Josh has ever had. The problem with this Bills team is I really don't trust their defense. We'll see if that's able to recover against some of the best quarterbacks in the league, which almost entirely reside in the AFC at this point in the playoffs. But the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, I think this is his best chance to knock off the champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll see if he does it or if he gets the opportunity to. The Bills are the third best team in the National Football League. And into the top two, which I said before the season, this will be your Super Bowl matchup. They were 1-2 on Bryson's Best 10 for over half the season before they had to make some changes based on some game results. So at number 2, the best team in the NFC and the second best team in the National Football League is the Detroit Lions. The Lions are the second best team in the National Football League, and here's why. Actually, no, let Dan Campbell tell you why, and let Dan Campbell tell you what the Lions did once again for the 15th time this season to wrap up the number 1 seed in the NFC.
Kneecap.
That's their identity. They're going to punch you in the mouth. They're going to be physical. By the way, we talk about how great Jahmyr Gibbs was, and he was phenomenal against the Minnesota Vikings. Loved him at Alabama. Loved when the Lions picked him. 4 touchdowns against Minnesota, one of the best defenses in professional football. It appears, according to reports, Dan Campbell, this particular player himself, that David Montgomery might be back for Detroit, back on the field after essentially just a month off from what looked like a devastating MCL injury, back from injury in the divisional round. Again, he's Thunder, Jahmyr Gibbs is Lightning, Knuckles, Sonic, however you want to refer to them. They're an outstanding tandem. The Lions are the best offensive line in football. I've been saying that for years. Jared Goff has had an outstanding season statistically. Not a great game against Minnesota, you know, in that front. I think he threw a couple of picks, but generally accurate. Jared Goff, I've always said the book on Jared Goff is, if you pressure him, he regresses tremendously. Actually, this has been the best passer rating that Jared Goff has had in his career against pressure. Matter of fact, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in football under pressure statistically if you look at Pro Football Focus and some second and third level stats. So Goff has been excellent, best year of his career. Ben Johnson just keeps cooking up stuff week after week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Laporta, Jamison Williams, the speedster on the outside. There's nothing this offense doesn't have. Defensively, they're going to have to gamble a lot. They're going to have to send a lot of blitzes. Aaron Glenn might have done a more impressive job in that game than Ben Johnson did all season long. I think the Lions have 3 head coaches in their staff. Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn. All of them are excellent at what they do, and it's why the Lions, I think, are going to win the NFC and why they are the second best team in the National Football League. And, of course, at number 1, returning number 1 from last week, but they've been that way almost all season long with the exception of about 3 or 4 weeks. It is the back-to-back Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are the best team in the National Football League, and here is why. Well, Patrick Mahomes is the greatest statistical playoff quarterback ever as it pertains to winning percentage, as it pertains to touchdown interception ratio. Coming back from 10 down, he's the greatest playoff quarterback indisputably ever, even over Brady in that regard. Travis Kelce, the best or second best. It's either he or Jerry Rice, statistically, playoff pass catcher of all time. Andy Reid, we know his resume. He's a 3-time champion. He's been to a couple of other Super Bowls. It's funny. Andy Reid, the thing was, we can't win the big game. Now we're talking about Andy Reid in the GOAT discussion. Andy's phenomenal. This Kansas City defense, Chris Jones, guys like that, got a week off. People questioning, gave up 30 to Denver. Yeah, with their second string guys. And with Denver's season on the line, I don't think that loss was indicative of what we're going to see from Kansas City. People, I think, are kind of grasping at straws at this point. Kansas City is the back-to-back champs. I think they're going to three-peat. They are the best team in the National Football League, are the Kansas City Chiefs. So, let's go and look back over the list. Top 10 teams going into the wild card round from 10 to 1. And again, playoff history factored in these rankings, as well as obviously the regular season. But from 10 to 1, we've got the Washington Commanders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Minnesota Vikings, Los Angeles Rams, Los Angeles Chargers, Baltimore Ravens, Philadelphia Eagles, Buffalo Bills, Detroit Lions, and on top, it is the Kansas City Chiefs. Before we go to break, and we're going to do this, one of my favorite segments that we do on the show around this time, my playoff weaknesses, the biggest reason that each of the 14 playoff teams will not win the Super Bowl. We'll get to that in about a minute and a half on the show. We'll take a break in just a second. Before that, I just want to send my thoughts and prayers to everybody in Southern California, in Los Angeles, seeing the fires on Twitter, on Instagram, everywhere. Obviously, I live in Tennessee, so I feel like detached from it, but, obviously not being there, but seeing my phone, seeing what's been going on, seeing how just the flames have engulfed, the mountains and how it's extended beyond that. I'm just praying for everybody who's been affected to my knowledge. And I pray that this stays the case. And I pray to God that I am stating a true statement. It does not appear there have been any casualties. Here's hoping and praying that is the case. But man, a lot of people have lost their houses. Again, the flames have just engulfed a big chunk of the Southern California area. So praying for everybody out there who've been dealing with the wildfires, and we'll continue to have your thoughts and prayers, and hopefully we can help financially as a country, and everyday people making everyday decisions to help everyday people in this time. So praying for everybody out there in Southern California dealing with the fires. We'll be back in just a minute for playoff strengths and weaknesses. Don't go away. Welcome back to Carving Up Life. So we do this every year around this time in the NFL playoffs, or at least prior to the NFL playoffs. We talk about the biggest playoff weaknesses of each of the teams in the postseason. So now we got 14. We've had the 14-team playoff system since the 2021 season. Ironically, that's when we started doing the segment. And we tried to, we go over why each and every team won't win the Super Bowl. Obviously, one of them will. But after it's over, we look at the 13 teams that didn't hoist the Lombardi Trophy, that made it to the postseason. We say, okay, how close was this to being like, okay, that's why they didn't make this or win the Super Bowl, rather. And we usually get about 75 to 80% right over the course of the postseason year. So let's go and get the background music going on right now, because it's one of my favorite segments to do. We will start. Get the music going on right now. Here we go. We will start in the AFC. So the biggest strengths and weaknesses of all of the teams in the AFC, the reason they will not win the Super Bowl. Let's start with the 7 seed, the newcomers, the Denver Broncos. Their biggest weakness is the Broncos. It's their first rodeo. It's the first rodeo for the Denver Broncos on a lot of fronts. You talk about Bo Nix, who's had the second best rookie season of anybody, to Jaden Daniels. There's no question about that. Efficient, accurate, pushes the ball down the field. Courtland Sutton, his first playoff game as well, just like Bo Nix, and he's been productive for some time in Denver. Offensive line's excellent. A lot of their guys, first rodeo. Sean Payton, all-time great head coach, future first ballot Hall of Famer in my estimation, Super Bowl champion with New Orleans back in 2009, his first rodeo as the Denver Broncos head coach. There's a lot of newness to this. Listen, they're big underdogs against Buffalo. I'm not going to say it's going to be like, Alabama versus Cornbread State 10 years ago. They're obviously got a shot to win the game because of their offensive play calling and whatnot. Excellent roster. Denver, not quite enough, not enough seasoning and experience to be able to go on a deep playoff run. The Broncos, that's their biggest weakness. It's, again, the Broncos. Try to throw a little spice to it. It's their first rodeo. For my Pittsburgh Steelers, I have to get this out of the way. What's their biggest weaknesses? Well, The offense has hit a steel wall with Mr. Very Limited. Instead of Mr. Unlimited, which Russell Wilson dubbed himself years ago, it's Mr. Very Limited. So in the last 4-game losing streak, the Pittsburgh Steelers have averaged 14 points a game. Russell Wilson in that span, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks, and a passer rating of 81. We can talk about a number of things. The fact that George Pickens has missed 2 of those 4 games, and the last 2, particularly the most recent one, totally disappeared. 6 targets, 3 drops. I actually counted 4, but the NFL said 3 drops, 1 catch, and had as many yards as I did sitting on my couch watching the game. So George Pickens, head case, it's been a disaster the last few games as it pertains to his immaturity, now bleeding into his productivity. The Steelers have tried to establish the run consistently. That's what Arthur Smith wants to do with Najee Harris, with Jalen Warren. It's just not generating enough offense. The Steelers' offensive line has always been a bit of a weakness the last few years. But again, Russell Wilson, veteran quarterback, been there, done that, won a Super Bowl. But in the last 4 games, now that they've played some real contenders like Philly and Baltimore and Kansas City and a hot Cincinnati team, kind of hit a wall a little bit, a steel wall with Mr. Very Limited. That is my Steelers' biggest weakness going into the playoffs. For the Los Angeles Chargers, the 5 seed, what's their biggest weakness as well? The wide receiver room has little electricity. Get it? Chargers, electricity. Point is, by the way, not all of these are puns. For the Los Angeles Chargers, so Ladd McConkey, the only receiver, by the way, who had 1,100 yards in his rookie campaign out of Georgia. Shout out Ladd McConkey, but the only receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers to have over 800 yards receiving. Yes, they have Josh Palmer, and they have Quentin Johnson, who still has a little bit of a concern as it relates to the drops. That's going to be a problem. Listen, something else, too, is the fact that Justin Herbert is the second playoff start of his career. He's looking for his first W in the stage. For as talented as we all acknowledge him to be, and I've loved Herbert since Oregon, does need to get a W in the playoffs. Jim Harbaugh, back in the NFL for the first time in a decade. Year 1, shocker. He's gotten his team to the playoffs after a 5-win season in 23. The Chargers defense is excellent. They're going to have to win a lot of kind of nip and tuck close games in the postseason, which I think they're capable of doing. I had them in the AFC title game before the season began. I just worry about their presence as it pertains to, having that go-to guy. If they double Ladd McConkey, who can beat you over the top? That's my concern. That's the biggest weakness for the Los Angeles Chargers. To the Houston Texans, what's their biggest weakness? It's the fact that a bad O-line has contributed to Stroud's sophomore slump. That has been a problem. So Houston last year gave up 38 sacks to C.J. Stroud. This year, 52 sacks given up to C.J. Stroud, which has been a contributing factor in his sophomore slump, and the fact that he has regressed a little bit from last year. He's been a little bit more, careless with the football, but the accuracy's kind of come and gone. But CJ still has a big arm. CJ can still move. There's got the bye week because the Texans already clinched their playoff spot going to the final week of the regular season. The injuries to guys like Tank Dell, God bless him, knock on wood for him, hated to see what happened to him against Kansas City. Stephon Diggs got hurt a while back, so you're not going to see him anytime soon. So Houston's been decimated a little bit offensively, but defensively, 2 guys in their defensive line with double-digit stacks. Derek Stingley Jr. had an outstanding season, so they're a little bit like the Chargers in the sense that they're going to have to win kind of close defensive, 24-20 games, stuff like that, in order to make a playoff run. Also, they don't have a lot of momentum going the postseason, which was very different than the situation they had last year. The Texans' biggest weakness, the offensive line. I don't see it getting any better in the playoffs, and it's led to a regression in C.J. Stroud. The 3-seed Baltimore Ravens, what's their biggest weakness? To quote the legendary Marshall Mathers, Eminem, will the real Lamar Jackson please stand up? Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP, might be a 3-time MVP a month from now in the playoffs in his career. Not great, okay? 2-4 in the playoffs, averages running and passing about 220 yards per game, 9 total touchdowns, 9 total turnovers, okay? 56% completions percentage and a passer rating of 75. And people saying, a majority of those playoff games happened 4 or 5 years ago. True, but one of the worst of those starts was his most recent against Kansas City when the Ravens scored only 10 points against the Chiefs at home in the AFC title game. Listen, the beauty for Lamar Jackson is you're a playoff disappointment until you're not. Peyton Manning was the same way. MVP, setting records, was already putting together a Hall of Fame resume early in his career in Indianapolis, but Peyton couldn't win the playoffs. Peyton couldn't show up big time in the postseason. Eventually, he did. Peyton had that run in 06, and it pretty much dispelled that narrative, or at least most of it, for good once he got a Super Bowl ring. I'm not even saying Lamar Jackson's got to win a ring this season, although for this Ravens team, he's got a great opportunity to. But it's a matter of, even if you go on the divisional round, but you go in a 38-31 game against the Buffalo Bills, and you play amazing, that's all I want to see from Lamar. But the moment's not too big. He himself, a minute, he gets a little antsy, a little jacked up for these games. Slow down, take a deep breath. You've been in the postseason before for 6 games. You've got an opportunity to kind of right those wrongs. That is the biggest weakness for the Ravens. Will the real Lamar Jackson please stand up to the 2-seed Buffalo Bills, who Baltimore very well could face in the divisional round? What's their biggest weakness? It is the defense's inability to stop playoff teams. I'm going to give a stat that this is going to shock you guys. So Buffalo, 2-3 record against playoff teams. That's not great. Here's what's even more concerning, okay? 33 points allowed did the Buffalo Bills give up to playoff teams this year. 33 points per game. That is the 4th worst in NFL history by a playoff team, giving up 33 points to teams that made the postseason. So, again, they're very much the anti-Chargers and Texans in that they're going to have to put up at least 35 points, 31 to 35 points in order to win these games, because they just can't stop a nosebleed. Secondary's been bad. Pass rush has been disappointing. And what's shocking is that Sean McDermott is a defensive coach, but hasn't that kind of been the knock on him and on the Bills, is that, yeah, you're a defensive coach, but you've given up 40 burgers to Kansas City in the postseason, okay? You haven't been able to get stops at the end of the game against guys like Deshaun Watson. Joe Burrow torched you in the snow in Buffalo a couple of years ago in the postseason. So that's a big concern for the Bills moving forward. It's just the defense has taken a big step back. Offense is actually a little bit more well-rounded than it had been in years past. The defense, not even close. That is the Bills' biggest weakness. And people are going to roll their eyes at me for what it is with the Kansas City Chiefs, but find me the objective real weakness that you actually are concerned about. Actually concerned about. Mine is pretty simple. It's one word. Fatigue. And that's it. Fatigue. That's how confident I am Kansas City's gonna go 3-peat. And I'm a Steelers fan, so I'd love to see my Steelers do something, but that's not realistic. So let's see. They've got the best or second greatest playoff quarterback of all time by the numbers, Patrick Mahomes, who's got 3 rings already. You got one of the greatest coaches ever, Mount Rushmore, Andy Reid. You've got the second greatest pass catcher in NFL history to Jerry Rice, Travis Kelce. You've got a defense coached by the best DC in football, Steve Spagnuolo, that is rolling. The running game has Pacheco back. The wide receiving core, all of a sudden, best it's been all season long. Xavier Worthy, who's built confidence. DeAndre Hopkins, been there and done that. And Hollywood Brown, who has some playoff experience of his own. You have to imagine during this bye week, Mahomes would throw a lot of passes to Hollywood. If you want to say the over-the-top shot, okay, but the Chiefs literally won a Super Bowl 2 years ago by dinking and dunking on people, and to a degree did it last year. It was more of a defensive situation what the Chiefs did in 2023, but 22, they kind of just dinked and dunked their way to a Super Bowl because they have one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the game. Find me a true, bite you in the behind weakness with the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't see it. I really don't. This is a dynasty. I think this might be the best team of these 3 that Kansas City's put together. The record says it. The confidence says it. Championship pedigree says it. That is the biggest weakness of the Chiefs. The fatigue aspect of it, by the way, is they played, since Mahomes became the starter, they played a whole nother season of games. They played 17 playoff games, which is the length of a new NFL season with Patrick Mahomes. So a whole nother season in addition to the 6 that they played, the 7 they played with him as the starter. That is the Chiefs' biggest weakness. Let's go now to the NFC, the biggest strengths and the biggest weakness of each NFC team going the postseason. We'll start with the 7-seed Green Bay Packers. Their biggest weakness is they can't beat the big dogs. That's Green Bay's problem. So Green Bay against playoff teams this year is 2-5. And those 2 wins came against the beat-up Rams and the Houston Texans, who some people think might be the worst team in the postseason in 2024. So all those concerns come in for Green Bay. By the way, they didn't finish the regular season very well. They lost to Minnesota when they had an opportunity to put themselves in a spot to get the 6th seed as opposed to the 7th seed and have to go to Philly. Or, by the way, could have had a chance to do that again in Week 18, put themselves in a spot to get that seed, even though Washington won, and they lost to the Chicago Bears at home at Lambeau, which, by the way, Green Bay in their division, in the best division of football, 1-5, and that one win, tipped blocked field goal on the part against the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field earlier this season. Look, Jordan Love last year in the playoffs torched Dallas. Now they have Josh Jacobs, but no Christian Watson. Love is actually beat up, injured elbow that he suffered against the Chicago Bears. By the way, this Packers team is 5-5 without Jair Alexander, who's probably out for the season. Love Matt LaFleur. I just don't, youth and experience, injuries, didn't finish the season well, can't beat the good teams. I just don't think Green Bay is going to be playing more than one postseason game. So that is their biggest weakness. Can't beat the big dogs. 2, the 6th seed, the Washington Commanders. Their biggest weakness is the defense can't command the run or command the football. What does that mean? It means that they're 28th in the NFL against the run. And in terms of being able to take the football away, the Washington Commanders this season, 29th in interceptions this year. So they just don't take the football away. By the way, they give up 60% touchdowns in the red zone this season, so the defense can't stop a nosebleed. So again, it's a situation kind of like the Buffalo Bills where Jayden Daniels going to have to be special, and that's a lot to ask for a rookie. Be amazing, put up 30 a game. Can Jayden Daniels do it? Maybe. I'm not going to count this kid out after what he's done in the clutch game after game after game. Dan Quinn's got championship experience. Cliff Kingsbury, good offensive play calling. Terry McLaurin. I just don't think this Washington team's going to be able to get enough stops to make a run in the playoffs. They're going to go defense heavy, believe me, in this upcoming NFL draft. So that is the biggest weakness for the Washington Commanders. Let's go to the Minnesota Vikings, the 5 seed. Their biggest weakness is concerning playoff inexperience. Sam Darnold, 0 playoff starts. Kevin O'Connell, 0 playoff wins. So this is O'Connell's 2nd career postseason game as a head coach in the National Football League. The first time the Vikings lost to Daniel Jones. And by the way, that's the game that got Saquon Barkley franchise tag, Daniel Jones paid, and the Giants moved on from Saquon. But the point is, we're not talking about the Giants. We're talking about the Vikings. So I don't think Sam Darnold is going to be as bad against the LA Rams as he was against the Lions when he struggled throughout, couldn't generate anything, completion percentage was in the dumpster, did not play well against Detroit. With that said, though, there is the pressure of, man, we could have the 1 seed, playoffs are running through one of the best home field advantage venues in football, US Bank Stadium, crazy loud stadium, great fan atmosphere, to, oh shoot, we got to play the team that won the Super Bowl a few years ago in their building, as opposed to getting a first-round bye and have the playoffs run through our building. So there is an added pressure, mostly for the Vikings offense. Vikings defensively didn't play that well against the Lions, gave up 4 touchdowns to Gibbs, but that's Ben Johnson. That's a loaded Lions offense. The Rams offense is really good. Championship experience in the part of Stafford and Kupp, but at the same time, not as low as Detroit, and we know how Ben Johnson has been successful against Flores. Playoff experience, again, I'm very much I'll believe it when I see it type of guy. Vikings can go on a run. They've got the organizational structure and the roster to do it. I just don't know if they have the playoff experience to go on a run. That is the biggest weakness for the Vikings. The team they're going to be playing, the Los Angeles Rams, their biggest weakness is the offense has sputtered to close the season. Here's a fun stat for you guys. So you remember that game when they played the Buffalo Bills and Stafford was excellent and they scored 44 points against Buffalo. They scored 44 points combined in the next 3 games, averaged about 14 points per game in their last 3 wins with Stafford and company, okay? Scored 12 against the San Francisco 49ers, 19 against the Jets, and then 13 against the Cardinals. Some of these defenses have been struggling over the last part of the season, so that's a concern. I love Stafford in the playoffs, Kupp in the playoffs. Nakua and Kyron added extra gear to this offense, and Sean McVay's been successful with and without Stafford in the postseason, which is why I think the Rams are so potentially dangerous. But at the same time, just is the bye week enough to get the offense out of this recent funk that they've been in, where the defense kind of had to carry them? That is the biggest weakness for the Los Angeles Rams. To the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the 3 seed in the NFC, their biggest weakness is the defense makes me shiver me timbers. Corny, yes, I know, and I acknowledge that. In their first 10 games of the season, Tampa Bay gave up 26 points per game on average. In their last 7 games, they gave up about 17 points per game on average. The problem is the Chargers were the only playoff team they faced in that span. Now, they shut down the Chargers, but at the same time, didn't play a lot of great teams over the course of the season. Struggled against teams like Dallas. Even New Orleans got a little bit going offensively in that game where Tampa Bay shut down the NFC South at the end of the year. So, by the way, Todd Bowles, the defensive guy, Kalijah Kancey, who's been excellent, Vita Vea. They've got good guys in the interior. I just have questions about Tampa's secondary, the ability to be great against quarterbacks like a Jayden Daniels, or if they were to play, Jalen Hurts and that Philadelphia Eagles passing attack, which statistically isn't great, but has the upside to be great if Philadelphia has to throw the ball more often than they do. So we'll see what Tampa Bay is able to do if their recent defensive streak has been a matter of the teams they played, or if it's been Todd Bowles has fixed it and Tampa Bay gets hot down the stretch for the second straight year, like the Rams did, and makes the playoffs and wins their division. That is the biggest weakness for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. To the Philadelphia Eagles, the 2 seed, their biggest weakness is Nick Sirianni's fourth down decision making. We can go all the way back to week 2 against the Atlanta Falcons. Remember that game where they decided to throw the ball on 3rd and short to Saquon. Saquon dropped the pass. They then inexplicably decided to kick a field goal as opposed to making Kirk Cousins drive the field, or they could have gotten the first down to wrap it up. And you had 4th down calls against the Saints that were questionable, against the Jags that were questionable. At the end of the half, situationally, against the Rams, they weren't very good. So again, this Eagles team is one of the 3 best rosters in the NFL, I believe. Jalen Hurts looks like he's going to be back. I know there's some concerns about the passing game. Most of that, to me, is by design. They're a Saquon Barkley-led team. Let Jalen Hurts, work out of that. But I think Jalen Hurts, we saw in the Super Bowl against Kansas City, can push the ball down the field with these targets. Brown, Smith, Goddard, others. The problem is, in these close games against great coaches, Matt LaFleur's a great coach. Okay, Todd Bowles has been a successful head coach. We know what Dan Campbell is. Those are the teams that they could very well face. By the way, Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings, excellent coach. These are the teams they could face in the postseason this year. Do I trust Nick Sirianni in these 4th down decision-making as it pertains to kicking a field goal, as it pertains to going for it or not going for it? Forget the analytics, just the gut feeling, the feel of the game. I don't know if I trust Nick Sirianni in that regard. And if they somehow go out to Green Bay in round 1, Nick Sirianni could be looking for a new job, potentially. That is the biggest weakness for the Philadelphia Eagles. And finally, with the Detroit Lions, the 1 seed, their biggest weakness is the defense is running out of bodies, okay? Coming into last week, they had 12 guys on IR defensively, and they just lost Terrion Arnold, who's been a solid corner out of Alabama this year. So they're dealing with a number of injuries. They had to move their nickel guy to the outside to guard Justin Jefferson, which kudos to him. He did a phenomenal job at guarding what I believe to be the best receiver in football. But Aaron Glenn has had to bring a lot of blitzes. That does concern me in the postseason, even beginning with their first game, whoever it may be against, in the sense that if you have to continue to blitz over and over and over and over, does that show, hey, we just don't have enough guys? And by the way, I do think that's the case for the Lions. Now, again, they've got the offense to be able to score a lot of points and to be able to overcome that because they have multiple points this season. But that's my biggest concern for the Detroit Lions. So there you go. So AFC, NFC, playoff weaknesses. The biggest game of sorry, I was looking at this at a tweet from saying that the NFL says they're going to continue to prepare to play the Rams and Vikings game at SoFi. Sorry, I just got off of this, but I just saw this on my phone. But it said, if necessary, though, the game would be played Monday night at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. So, again, with the wildfires, our thoughts and prayers to everybody in Los Angeles and in Southern California for what they've been dealing with out there. But so it looks like the NFL will play the game in Arizona if need be, but as of now, that game is going to be played at SoFi. So back over the weaknesses, the biggest reason that each of these 14 playoff teams will not win the Super Bowl. For the Broncos, it's their first rodeo. For my Steelers, offense has had a steel wall with Mr. Very Limited. For the Chargers, wide receiver room has little electricity. For the Texans, bad O-line has contributed to Stroud's sophomore slump. For the Baltimore Ravens, will the real Lamar Jackson please stand up? For the Buffalo Bills, defense's inability to stop playoff teams. For the Kansas City Chiefs, it's fatigue. Find the weakness. Okay, I don't see it. For the Green Bay Packers, can't beat the big dogs. For the Washington Commanders, defense can't command the run or command the football. The Minnesota Vikings, concerning playoff inexperience. The Rams, offense has sputtered to close the season. The Buccaneers, defense makes me shiver me timbers. The Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Sirianni's fourth down decision-making, and the Detroit Lions, defense is running out of bodies. By the way, with Kansas City, people are going to be like, oh, you don't see any weaknesses with the Chiefs. I don't see something that when I watch Kansas City, people are like, oh, they played close games against Carolina, and they played close games against the beat-up Chargers and others. Here's what I would say, and I've been saying this all season long, and I've been proving correct on it, that when you play so many big games in in your life as a franchise. I saw it with my Golden State Warriors, who, by the way, could you just get Steph a actual co-star, please, Mike Dunleavy Jr. Point is, there's my Warriors rant for the day. If you've been playing that many playoff games, that many big games over the course of a half decade plus, what's a regular season game in October against the Raiders? I mean, what does it matter? I mean, really, it matters to win, obviously, but you got to play it close. And then it gets to the end. It's like, hey, Mahomes, could you save us? Hey, say less. I got y'all. He's been the best fourth quarter quarterback all season long. He's been the best third down quarterback all season long. It's very much we're going to kind of do the bare minimum because we don't want to expend our energy before the playoffs because we played, as I mentioned earlier, an entire season of playoff games, exactly 17 games prior to this year in the Mahomes era. So a whole extra season of games on top of the regular seasons that these guys have played. And again, by the way, when they really need to step up, Pittsburgh, Christmas Day, we can wrap up the 1 seed. Oh, what a shock. Mahomes was amazing. Kelsey was amazing. The defense shut the Steelers down. Andy Reid was great, and the Chiefs wrapped up the 1 seed. No, shocker. What do you know? And the thing that drives me the most crazy about the Chiefs narratives is that they looked worse than this last year, way worse than this last year, and won the Super Bowl. See, I picked them to win the Super Bowl last year, but even I was like, man, at one point they lost 4 or 6 games. Mahomes doesn't look that good. Even the defense is taking a step back, like against Green Bay. I don't know. Like, they'll win their first playoff game. They're going to beat Miami. But after that, I don't know. Buffalo's on a roll. Baltimore's on fire. And they did. And I picked them in those games. Don't get me wrong. But because I don't bet against Mahomes like I don't bet against Brady. But there you go. Looks like the Jets completed an interview with Mike Borgonzi for the general manager position. I think they should hire Louis Riddick. I'm not going to lie. Listen, I have a soft spot for Louis Riddick because I've had minor interactions with him over the years. I think Louis is brilliant at what he does. But I think that would be a good hire for the Jets. I do. Now, will he want to take the job? I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. Before we get out of here, we got so we're going to do a show tomorrow night, last show in the studio before I head to Florida for the next few months. But we're going to do a show tomorrow night, but I'll go ahead today and predict the college football playoff semifinal round. It's down to 4. So let's get our playoff music going. Here we go. So, first game played tomorrow night in the college football playoff semifinal game. We've got the Notre Dame Fighting Irish taking on the Penn State Nittany Lions in what game is it? Oh, yeah, the Orange Bowl. The Capital One Orange Bowl. So here's my thing that I'm looking at with these two teams. Is that, by the way, neither has made a national championship since the 1980s, so keep that in consideration. But both teams are built very similar. Okay, efficient quarterback play, Riley Leonard, Drew Aller, great running games for Notre Dame, excellent defenses. By the way, both teams, actually all 4 college football playoff teams in the top 10 defensively this season. Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame. I went back and forth because I feel like these are 2 of the most evenly matched teams in college football just in terms of how they want to play. Want to be physical. Notre Dame was outstanding defensively last week against Georgia. The same could be said about the fact how Penn State was able to contain the likes of Ashton Jeanty and others. Both teams, to a degree, had, I'm not going to say easy, but less difficult paths to the semifinal. Like, I think Texas and Ohio State had more difficult roads to the semifinal than this. Ohio State had to take down my Tennessee Volunteers, and the number 1 team, Oregon. Texas had to knock out Clemson with championship experience, Dabo Swinney, and then to knock out an Arizona State team with a guy, Cam Scatabo, that should have been a Heisman finalist. More difficult roads than the case of Notre Dame going through Indiana, who everybody knew was fraudulent, other than their coach, evidently, and then Boise State. Then Georgia without their starting quarterback, in the case of Penn State going through the likes of SMU, maybe close to fraudulent as Indiana was, and then the semifinal taking on a Boise State team led by Ashton Jeanty. I think this is a defensive battle throughout most of it. By the way, this is the first matchup, this matchup is going to guarantee we'll have our first black head coach in the national championship game ever, be it Marcus Freeman or James Franklin. Pressure on both, particularly Franklin, because the whole thing has been, can Franklin win the big game? No, give me the Irish. Notre Dame advances to the national championship game. I don't know why that says Penn State plus 1.5. That should say Notre Dame minus 1.5. I apologize for that. But Notre Dame wins this game 27-24, and the Irish are off to their first national championship since the 2012 season. They have not won the national championship. I said appeared in, won the national championship since the mid-1980s. Notre Dame to the Natty. And now, Friday night, what a game this is going to be. The Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic featuring the teams, I believe, with the exception of Oregon, to have the two best rosters in college football. The Ohio State Buckeyes, the Texas Longhorns, college football titans clashing in Dallas, Texas, or Fort Worth, Texas, to be exact, Arlington at Jerry World for the Cotton Bowl. So this could, first of all, looks like it's going to be a home field advantage for Texas playing at Jerry World. But Texas going through Clemson and Dabo Swinney, and what was a closer game than most people maybe thought it would be. And then go through Arizona State. Again, another game that was closer than most people thought it would be. But defensively, especially up front, Texas' defensive line has NFL guys everywhere. Offensively, same thing, particularly on the outside at wide receiver. Meanwhile, for Ohio State, we talk about the talent this group has at wide receiver, but this kid, Jeremiah Smith, is, you see why they compare him to Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones. He is, was he 18 years old, and the kid is a freak of nature. He's a freshman now, and I think he'd be a top 10 pick in the NFL tomorrow. The guy's awesome. Both quarterbacks we have some questions about. Will Howard, who's been on a roll as of late, and Quinn Ewers. I've told me and my dad's a huge college football fan. We talk about Texas, we talk about all these other teams. And I told my dad yesterday, I said, I think Quinn Ewers is the Jimmy Garoppolo of college football. And I'm talking about Jimmy Garoppolo when he was with the 49ers, where I always felt like Jimmy Garoppolo, with the stacked roster, I always felt like he was coaching around Jimmy G. I always felt like Shanahan was coaching around Jimmy G. I feel like Steve Sarkisian, people bag on Sarkisian, oh, the play calling's terrible. No, I think the play calling is requisite to the quarterback talent he has. Now, next year, when they have Arch Manning, if Arch is just as good as advertised now, he's got the Manning name to live up to, so that's going to be tough for the young man, but I think he can handle it at Texas. But once Arch Manning takes over, I may pick Texas to win it all next year. I think they're going to be awesome. The recruits they got coming in, they're great. I have questions about Quinn Ewers' ability to throw the football down the field. I have questions about his decision-making, his accuracy, mobility. Like, I don't love him at all as an NFL prospect. I'm not quite as low as on him as I was on Mac Jones in 2021 when I was proven to be very correct on Mac. Not that low, but he's very similar in that regard. So, give me the hottest team in America, the red-hot Ohio State Buckeyes. I love them. Minus 5.5 in the Cotton Bowl, 34-21, two-score victory over the Texas Longhorn. Ohio State wins 34-21 over Texas, and we will get a national championship featuring Notre Dame and Ohio State. By the way, two non-conference champions. Something else. Did you see where James Franklin took a little bit of a shot? By the way, I kind of agreed with him. Actually, I did agree with him wholeheartedly. He was talking about Notre Dame. James Franklin was head coach of Penn State. And he said that, everybody should be playing in a conference because Notre Dame doesn't. I agree with James Franklin. I do. And Notre Dame probably at some point is going to have to join the Big Ten because you want to at some point be able to get that first round bye. But Notre Dame is going to take that personally. I can remember in the 2020 season when it was weird because of COVID and some teams played more games than others. And Ohio State, I forget, did they play like 6 games that year? It was like little compared to what Clemson played. And they played Clemson in the Sugar Bowl in the playoff semifinal. And I remember when the coaches poll, because they do the AP poll, college football playoff poll, and then the coaches vote on the top 25 teams. I remember so well talking about this on my show 4 years ago. And Dabo Swinney took a huge shot at Ohio State. He had them ranked like 8th when they were ranked like number 3 in the playoff poll when they were playing Clemson. They had them ranked 8th. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He said, well, they didn't play enough games. Okay, but it's still Ohio State with Ohio State talent. Justin Fields was there. Like, that was a loaded Buckeyes team. And so for him, I think Olave was there. Like, for him to take a shot at that squad, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You're just making your team's job harder. And sure enough, Ohio State came in and beat the brakes off Clemson in the semifinal before Alabama went on to beat them in the Natty. So there you go. And I'll say this too before we get out of here. We all bagged on Ryan Day. I've been a Ryan Day defender over the years, but the loss to Michigan was just unacceptable. The game plan was bad. You were a 20-point favorite. Michigan is not even close of a talent, at least now that you have. It was horrible. We forgot two things. A, Ohio State probably is the most talented team in college football. Texas is in that ballpark. Oregon was close. And also, this might go down if Ohio State is able to beat Texas and then beat either Notre Dame or Penn State. I think it's going to be Notre Dame. This could go down. The Michigan loss could go down as like the greatest wake-up call in the history of college football. They roll Tennessee, roll Oregon. I think they're going to win comfortably, not destroy Texas, but I got them winning by 13 points and covering easily. And then if they go on to win the national championship, regardless of the margin, it's going to be like, man, that was as dominant a run in the national championship. New playoff, we get that. But as we've seen, so again, I got Notre Dame over Penn State in a close one, and I've got Ohio State over Texas by 13 points. So there you go. And with that, that is all the time we have for today's show. Appreciate everybody stopping by. As always, be sure to catch Carving Up Live tomorrow, not Friday. We usually do it Friday, but again, obviously going to be headed to Florida for the next few months. So last show in the studio, basically until the summer, tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific time, right here on Facebook, as well as the Carving It Up YouTube channel and the Grid Network YouTube channel. Of course, be sure to like, share, comment, and please take 2 seconds out of your day. Hit that big old subscribe button down there. Helps the channel grow exponentially. And just as importantly, be sure to go subscribe to the Grid Network. That is GRYD, the Grid Podcast Network, right here on YouTube, as well as any and everywhere that you get your favorite podcasts. You can find us at the Grid Network, where we dare to be different. So please subscribe to both. Trying to grow, both channels in case the Grid, the entire network. Check out my man Patrick Brown writing articles for the Grid's website. Check out our other content creators anywhere you get your podcasts, on social media, etc. We got a lot of talented guys in this network, so please check them out. And as far as yours truly, subscribe to the Grid, yes, but also please subscribe to Carving It Up on YouTube. All right, we will see you guys tomorrow. Going to do NFL playoff predictions. Cannot wait. Talk about my Steelers, the future of Mike Tomlin, all of it, and we'll see what, of course, happens in the world of sports over the next few, or not the next few days, the next 24 hours, so to speak. So we'll see you then. Stay safe out there, everybody. God bless y'all. Peace out. Last show in the studio for a while tomorrow. I'm going to miss it. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.